It's so interesting to me. The bonds throughout the book are all incomplete, right? Like Ken has incomplete bonds with every character. In this instance, he can't be fully connected to Colonel Essex because he's not related, right? He's just a neighbor and he doesn't know him and hasn't known him since he was a child and isn't a descendant. And his relationship with his father is incomplete because he doesn't have a mother in the picture and it's not a family, and this boy has to do things, has to tag along for things that, in an otherwise like more stable home might be a fun thing for him to do, but in this case he kind of has to do these things. And his dad obviously has a drinking problem, and so he has to care for him in a way that he shouldn't have to care for him at that age. And then with his grandfather, he has this, his dad obviously has a weird incomplete relationship with his grandfather, so that with his father, so then Ken has it with his grandfather. And it's like all of that to say is like you captured the imperfections of people while still capturing the strengths of those connections, kind of like where they are. And there's an incompleteness that you feel, but still a strength that you feel. I shouldn't say I feel. And as I felt them, it was like this, it was beautiful and it was sad and it was cool, kind of like all at the same time, but not in like an edgy to be edgy way, but just in like a, here are these people, here are the relationships. This kid's just trying to find his way in the world. And man, wouldn't it be nice if he could find some stability?
I had one person who read it. She told me that she just wanted to give Ken a hug at the end of the book. I was like, yeah, fair enough. Ken's in a little rough shape there.
That's not much of a change for you, right?
My name is Kerry Kite. I used to load bombs in the Air Force, and now I'm a writer, a filmmaker, and an entrepreneur. Through using the post 9/11 GI Bill to go to college, working hourly jobs to pay the bills, and freelancing my way into a career, I've studied what it takes to successfully transition from service to civilian, and that study has become a conversation. On this podcast, I speak to other veterans, successful artists and entrepreneurs about their transition, what they did well, where they failed, what they learned, and most importantly, how they applied their skills. Episode 101 features Nick Efstathiou, an Army veteran, a writer, a teacher, and the author of Killers in Their Youth, one of Dead Reckoning Collective's latest publications. Welcome. This is Veteran Made. This episode is brought to you by Go Pills, a nootropic that gives your brain neurotransmitter support both acutely and over time. Those of us that served in the military, regardless of where we served and in what capacity we served, all came into contact with different chemicals, different percussions, and various elements of our environments that have affected our brain's ability to function. Think about your brain's performance and your mental health right now, yes, but think about your future too. We have so much more control over our long-term health than we realize. Visit gopills.com and use code VM15 at checkout for 15% off. That's VM15 for 15% off. Give your brain the neurotransmitter support it needs to perform well right now and over time.
All right. Good morning. We are live. Nick Efstathiou, welcome to Veteran Made.
Thank you.
Super, super excited to have you to talk about Killers in Their Youth, latest publication from Dead Reckoning Collective. Also just excited to have you on the podcast because we've now been internet friends for, I think, a few years. We were in a course. Yeah. We were in the intro to memoir course, I think, together like 3 years ago now at this point. So we've been emailing a little bit here and there and obviously over Instagram and all that stuff. So I'm glad to be with you.
Yeah, same here, man. It's awesome.
Rock on. So for those who don't know who you are, would love it if you could give us a brief primer on kind of who you are and when you served, and then we'll jump into Killers in Their Youth.
So my name is Nick Efstathiou. I'm 50. I'm going to be 51, which is absolutely terrifying because I'm an adult. I served in 94 and 95 in the Army, 13 Foxtrot, so forward infantry support team. Rock hard fisters is what we went by, and now as an adult that takes on so many other connotations. Luckily my students haven't gotten it yet because I do talk to them about it. I'm a teacher. I teach history from 7th to 12th grade at a small charter school. I am a dad. My wife has not murdered me yet. We've been together for 27 years. Married 29 in July. And I'm a grandfather. And I write primarily horror, so Killers was really a big step out of my comfort zone for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about that in particular, and to kind of get us into the book at large. Um, so you do something cool on Instagram. I mean, every day you write a short horror story, flash fiction, right? Or it's just about every day.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's some days where I'll take a break, and there was a while where I was using older stuff because I lost my oldest boy uh, to suicide just about 2 years ago. So there are some days, some weeks where I'm just like I can write a little bit, I just can't put all that gumption in. But yeah, I'm back into the groove of writing like 300 to 400 words of flash every day. So
Yeah, it's super cool. Cross Massachusetts, for those who are listening and aren't didn't find this episode through Instagram. That's your handle on Instagram, and you'll post a picture and then you'll write a piece of flash fiction about it, which I think is super cool, and it's always super fun to read. And how did that start for you? How did
so um, the main character, Duncan Blood, I actually started writing about him in high school. So and one day I was like, New England is terrifying. I'm going to write a little story. And then there was some feedback from the few people who followed me, my friends, and they're like, hey, what about Duncan? I was like, yeah, let's talk more. And so now it's just evolved into his journals and what he's experienced. But yeah, it's just been a slow process. I think I'm up to like 500,000 words on Duncan. So
Yeah, it's very Poe esque, kind of that way, where it's like it kind of has some Stoker vibes to it as well, with the kind of journal and the following along with the character. It's really interesting. Um, and yeah, for those that want to read more of that, like definitely check out Nick's Instagram, to read some of those stories. But I do want to talk primarily about Killers in Their Youth. How would you describe this book? Like, if you were to recommend it to somebody and you weren't the writer, you weren't the author, and you say, hey, you should read this book. It is in this genre. How would you describe it?
I would describe it as a boy learning why dad is the way dad is. Um, and that's pretty hard as a kid, is is learning why your parents do certain things. And I obviously got little parts of that when I was growing up, but all of it didn't come together until I was a veteran and obviously much older. There's the guys and the women that you talk to. It's just some of them have seen some stuff that's just brutal.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I'm 36, and I read this was the first piece of fiction, first book I actually picked up and read after my dad died. My dad died a month and a half ago. We're
Oh,
going
I'm
on
sorry.
going on 2 months ago. Thank you. And he wasn't a veteran. He didn't serve. His dad and his grandfather were both Army veterans, and his grandfather was Army Air Corps veteran. But my dad didn't serve, and so I couldn't necessarily relate specifically to um, the the specifics of what this character learns about his dad, but I could very much relate to this idea of understanding your parents better, if not fully better, because of the life experience that they had. And then as you grow older, obviously this character isn't as old as I am or as old as you are. He's still young, but as a son whose father just died, and as a dad of a 4.5 year old, I'm reading this book and I'm like, oh man, this is like helping me to emotionally and relationally map certain feelings. Even if I'm not able to fully cope with every feeling, perfectly and fully in the moment, I'm still able to understand, like, oh, there's quite a bit more to this thing that I'm thinking about or feeling than I realized at the time as a child, or that I realize now, even just at 36, because I know, the next 30 years, I'm going to learn even more, hopefully, and kind of grow more wise. It was
Right.
it was a really interesting experience for me to read this at the time that I read it. Yeah, yeah.
I'm glad, man.
Thanks. What led to you? What was the genesis of this story? What was the inspiration for this story? And what made you kind of cross over into? I mean, would you call this YA fiction, like young adult fiction? Is that what you would describe it as?
I guess, which freaks me out even more
Sure.
because I do ghostwriting on the side, and that's about as far from young adults as you could possibly get. It started just with I collect stories. I am that guy who's going to walk up to a veteran in the grocery store and go, "Oh, that's a Chosen Frozen hat you're wearing." Wow. And yeah, it drives my wife and my kids crazy because I'll be like, "Oh, that's a veteran," and they're like, "No, you don't have to make friends with every veteran you see." I'm like, well, I kind of do, but mostly the stories that my dad and my granduncle, talked about. And there's one part in the book where the boy's father goes, "I did a lot more than just kill," and that's my dad. My dad's a little different.
What so what made you want to take the stories that you're collecting from folks that you've met, Fight Club reference, single serving friends, right? And your own experiences with your father and your granduncle and say, I'm going to depart from the normal genres that I write in or that I write for if I'm helping out somebody else. And I'm going to write this story about this boy and try to collect and condense all of those thoughts, feelings, experiences down to his story. What made you decide to put pen to paper to make a complete story out of everything that was kind of swimming around in your head?
Because I saw this old man one day. It's literally just this old guy puttering along. He's got on a replica bombardier jacket because I learned later on that he had given it to a girl in Italy during World War II, his original. And he had just a baseball cap on that said World War II, U.S. Army Air Corps. And then you learn, as I talked to him, this man flew in what was called the Palesti raid over airfields. And just when these guys were young, the things they did are just amazing. And people forget when they look at older people, and kids when they look at older people, they don't realize the personal history that's there. And I wanted to be able to boil that down and say, this guy stops for no reason because he's remembering Chosen Reservoir, and this guy can only function when he's half in the bag because of what happened to him. So, and those are people I saw and knew as a kid, and I just wanted to try to give it a better focus, and I wanted people to know that kids see this. Whether you think they do or not, they see it. They know what's going on. And we have to remember that. So that was it.
It's an interesting perspective that you bring to it, right? Because you're a teacher. What age do you teach?
I teach 7th through 12th. So basically everything from 13 and 14 up to, I have like a 19-year-old in one of my classes. And yeah.
Well, it's so interesting. My wife was in education for a long time. That was she got her master's in education and then taught at a charter school in Brooklyn, New York when we lived there for a few years. And I volunteered to be her unpaid assistant coach on the girls volleyball team. And so I got to spend quite a bit of time. Hey, we won 2 championships. All right. It was fun.
Nice.
We earned it. But I mean, one of the things that I learned spending a lot of time with these kids, especially these charter schools with a progressive model of education where they're given or more autonomy to read and learn and speak and exchange ideas with adults, is that what you just said, which is that kids see a lot more than we realize that they do, but they are still kids. So while they don't have the full executive function, I mean, I might not either, obviously, but like at
Same.
least, but I'm older, right, and I have more experiences to kind of map those things. But they see these things. So if we're just going to spend time trying to paint a picture to make something more positive than it is, just in order to preserve innocence, that's a fool's errand, because they're seeing it anyway, and then they're going to, because they don't have the same lived experience, and kind of, that's a bad term because it's been co-opted, but they don't have the same length of experiences, or maybe diversity of experiences, that those of us that have kind of been around have. They're going to fill in those gaps themselves with things that they just might not know about, right? Because they still see those things. And we do this weird thing in our country where we just paint this uber positive uh, picture of our nation's veterans, A, as if we're not humans, B, as if we all did the same job, and C, as if all of these conflicts kind of had the same arc. It's like, well, they didn't. They were all different conflicts, and they had all these different arcs, and there's all these different people having all of these different experiences. Some were positive, some were negative. You can still support the troops and not be, we all learned that during the GWAT, right? Like,
Oh
like,
yeah.
support the troops, but not support the war. How do we do that? Like, our country wasn't actually ready. Our culture wasn't actually ready to have that conversation, because we didn't fully understand it. So, ending my ramble and kind of getting here to a statement or a question, like, I read this book, and I messaged you right away when I finished it, and I was like, man, this is the book that I'm going to send to a bunch of civilians that I think would be really interested, because you capture humanity in a way that I think is pretty spectacular. I've never really seen it done, where you just capture a whole human and you just put the humans on the page to say, hey, experience these people through this kid, instead of trying to say, like, oh, this guy fought in World War II, so he's a perfectly good guy.
Thank you. That means a lot. And no, it's you're exactly right that they're like, oh, veteran, and especially on like Memorial Day or Veterans Day, it's like picture postcard perfect. And it's like, they're people, people fuck up a lot, you know. My dad has told me some of the things he did in Vietnam, and he says the worst thing you can do is give a 20-year-old a rifle and tell him there's nothing wrong. He can do whatever he wants, And, junior enlisted, there's a reason why we run around and hit things with our heads, because we're stupid. It's like, but yeah.
Yeah. How much? I mean, the word that's coming to mind is effort, but I know it takes effort, obviously, to write, and I know it takes effort to write, a coherent story that can kind of sit by itself. But effort's the word that's coming to mind. Like, how much effort went into crafting that humanity within those characters? Like, was there any directions they wanted to go, or that you wanted to go with those characters, that you're like, no, I got to kind of keep them back over here? Or was it kind of literally just transcribing these feelings and thoughts that you had from these collected anecdotes over time?
It was literally just transcribing. I'm going to tell you some of the finer stuff that was pushed by Jessica. She's like, give me more in this. Let's narrow that. I mean, I've worked with other editors, and Jessica was just the bomb. She just really just pulled it out,
She's the best.
Oh yeah, she's fantastic. So, and so are the boys, Keith and Tyler. It's the whole crew there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was literally just taking, and sometimes it's an amalgamation of people, You, like, part of the grandfather was my granduncle, but also other veterans that I knew. Right? Because if I made him just my granduncle, he would have been a bumbling drunk, because that's what he was. And he had literally fallen out of a second-story window when he was a little boy, so he was a little touched upstairs as well. And I didn't put in one of my favorite stories from him, because he landed at Omaha Beach on D-Day, and his twin brother, they were their same squad, because this was before all the Saving Private Ryan, Sullivan brothers, right, drops down, they go running out, and my granduncle said, they got about halfway up, and his friend's head just goes by him. And my granduncle says that he goes, and I turned around, and every time he told the story, Gary, he would reach out and he'd grab me by the upper arm. He goes, Nicky, they took the boats away, because he didn't realize it was a one-way trip. I'm like, yeah, water landings be like that, Uncle Gus. So
yeah, they put those guys in some type of position for sure.
yeah.
Buck and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, and I mentioned it to him on that episode, and I'll mention it again to you, as I'm working on a screenplay right now, and I'm trying to take some of my own experiences, some experiences from another person that I know that I served with, and then some other people from some stories that I've heard. And it's really hard to do from a story standpoint. Not so much. It's pretty easy to just take experiences, put them on paper, and just have a kind of chronological set of experiences that somebody's having. But emotionally, relationally, as the author, writer of a story, I find myself feeling like, well, I don't want to take that experience away from somebody else and displace it onto this character. I didn't do this thing. So there's something about it that's uncomfortable. I'm working through it. I'm writing through it, right? That's the only way to do that, right? Is to write through it. How did you write through those things? Did you experience any of those thoughts where you're like, well, you don't want to paint a caricature of your granduncle, which I understand out of respect, right? But you also don't want to do that because that's bad characterization. But how did you choose the things that were real experiences? How did you choose to marry those real experiences to fictional characters? How did you map those things?
So one is, fortunately, I've written a lot. And I don't have to worry about that. I don't have to say, I didn't do X, Y, and Z. I can't write about that. But the way is, for me, and we'll stick with the grandfather, is that I wanted someone who would be disciplined. Not just from his time in the military, but just a disciplined individual. And so that's how I took his story. Like, how is he going to react? Why is he going to keep these things? Because even though it seems like he should be a hardcore, hard ass, I don't care how many guys I killed, that's not who he is. It might be the persona that he presents, but who he is someone who realizes that he has taken someone's life, that someone important to another human being has been killed. And so a lot of that too is bringing my own emotions into it. How would I feel? Because you sit back and you go, as an adult, you go, man, yeah, that person may needed to have been killed, but that was still pretty terrible, But so yeah, it's just really a matter of, like you said, fine tuning it. And what do you want your character to do? What do you want them to say? And as you keep writing, they're going to tell you, because there's some weird little sick thing inside your head going, are you going to do this?
Yeah, I loved how you were you were able to blend experiences from different branches. You were able to fold these guys being civilians, kind of working for the Navy, right? Like up there in that. It's funny too. I don't know if you read spoilers at all, but Jack Carr's new book has a submarine element to it, and the base that you write about, he writes about at the very beginning of
That's
his
awesome.
newest novel, which was super cool for me to read. I think that was that's the next piece of fiction I picked up after this one, fiction wise. That was just kind of like fun, Easter egg for the podcast community. But yeah, you were kind of able to blend, experiences from these different branches, but there was also this kind of shared. I'm thinking specifically about the mess hall scene, right, where there's this very shared kind of understanding of the hierarchy of experiences and how that both is important, because there definitely is a hierarchy of experiences that, if you have combat experience, that's different than just being deployed, right? Like I deployed,
Yeah.
I don't have combat experience. I have been shot at, I have not returned fire. There's a hierarchy there, right?
Yes.
Where there are, and so you actually, I thought you did having been on the non-combat side of it, reading that, I'm like, man, this was handled like really, really well. And in this kind of submarine base, which is kind of the last place you would expect that to be happening. What made you choose for them to be working there?
Well, again, a lot of it is from my own experiences. So my dad did work for the sub base. There were really guys like that. There was a table, a designated table for combat veterans only. And it was unofficial, but if you were sitting there and you were not a combat veteran, your ass was told to move. And my father is a frightening man, even at 74. So, but you're absolutely right. There is this ranking, and not like I'm better than you in the veteran community, but an understanding of I can't understand, right? I can't understand the combat vet from a personal point of view. I don't have that shared experience. Same thing, I never deployed, right? But I enlisted. I did my time. Got out earlier, much earlier than I wanted. But there is that shared experience. There is that separation from civilians. And it's that, hey guys, I put my hand up and I said, yeah, I'm willing to do this, But my hand doesn't quite go as high as the guy who was on a mountaintop, in the Hindu Kush, taking rounds and bringing them back. So
that's just the way things shake out sometimes, right? Like that's just the way that history unfolds. So I want to come. I guess now is a good time to kind of go there. So the conversation that Ken has with, I don't want to give too much away here either for folks that haven't read it, because I want them to read it. Think about the conversation he has with the nurse. I don't know. Do we want to give that away?
Sure.
Let's do it. Okay. Spoiler alert for those that haven't read. Gets to a specific kind of conversation that he has with the nurse, and the way that she outlines her experience was incredible, along the lines of what we were just talking about, right? Where there's so much more to war than maybe the common or average everyday citizen might think, or even Ken, who's the descendant of veterans and reads so much about military history and war, even kind of understands for himself. And he's wrestling with what he wants to do and who he wants to become and how he wants to kind of unfold his own life and how much agency he has over those choices. How did you write that scene? Like, were you thinking? Do you have an idea of what Ken does when he turns 18?
Yeah, my idea is that Ken enlists when he is old enough, and I believe in the story in my head that his dad's going to be pissed off. Because dad doesn't want that. Dad knows. Dad has a taste of war, and he knows it's bitter, and he doesn't want his boy to experience it. But obviously, like you said, Ken doesn't know. Ken thinks he has to. everybody in my family did X, Y, and Z, therefore I must do X, Y, and Z. Maybe with the steady influence of Colonel Essex, that might not be. Essex might be able to convince him to go to school and think about going into ROTC, But yeah, it was what is this boy going to think when he is there, when he has all of these things? And how is this woman going to react when this little 11-year-old, 12-year-old goes, that's Korea, because you're not expecting that,
Yeah, it's amazing scene. It was an incredible scene to read. Is Colonel Essex an amalgam of characters, or is he somebody specific from your life?
There was a colonel that I lived next to. I knew he was in World War I, and that he also had served in World War II. So, and he was in a wheelchair, but not because he had lost his legs. So he was an amalgamation of multiple characters, different people that I had met. Going to tell you right now, Colonel Essex was just fantastic.
Incredible character. I wanted more of him. He's just so good, which is great because you put it just enough on the page. And I want to come back to your collaboration with Jessica. I did not know she edited this. I'm just learning this for the first time. I was texting with Keith just separately about some other stuff, and we were texting about this book right after I was messaging with you. And I'm like, dude, this book is incredible, blah, blah, blah. And then we kind of got lost track in that conversation and didn't come back to it. But now that I know Jessica edited, I want to come back. But the Colonel Essex gave me there was some Stephen King vibes, Hearts in Atlantis vibes there. Kind of, was that an influence at all? Were there other influences outside of the genre from horror, from anything else? Like any influences outside of your own experiences with your family or these other veterans that you've spoken to?
I read a lot of Stephen King. Yeah. I haven't read Hearts in Atlantis since it came out. Great book.
Yep.
But of Mice and Men, I have like multiple copies of Steinbeck's all over the place. He is my big influence. But I also read nonstop, like military history, graphic novels, fiction. So, but I'd have to say the three biggest ones right now for me are Stephen King, his son Joe Hill, and John Steinbeck. But Steinbeck's my man. I forced my kids to read 2 books of his during history this year. They hated me for it, but that's all right.
One day they will say, Mr. E made me read Steinbeck. Or at least some of them will say, Mr. E made me read Steinbeck. And here I am rereading Steinbeck over the course of my life. It's not and that's a pretty solid Mount Rushmore you've got there for sure. Okay, collaborating with the editor, with Jessica on this. What was that collaboration like for you? How complete was your manuscript in your mind when you brought it to DRC, and like how did that, I don't want to give away too much, but like how did the process unfold for you, and what was your experience like?
So first, the experience was fantastic. I've worked with a lot of editors. Some of them I have absolutely hated. But that was very early on in my career as a ghostwriter. So by the time I brought the manuscript to Jessica, I did not think that I was handing her a perfect, finished piece. And her suggestions were just fantastic. I think that the relationship between Ken and Colonel Essex has a lot to do with Jessica pushing me, going, give me more, tell me more. How is this working out? And that encouraged me to sit there and think, yeah, all right, what's it like? What's going on? But
When
yeah.
you say what was it from your side of that conversation? She was asking for more. What were you? What wasn't there that was like? Was it unspoken for you or unwritten rather for you, and you kind of you wanted that relationship to be a certain way and for the reader to supply something? Or when you say she said more, what did you then dig into and kind of provide in terms of depth and texture?
So when they're talking, when Ken and the Colonel are talking, it's like wanted more of Ken actually talking and not just listening, like Ken interacting.
Mhm.
Um, and that part was hard for me because I was a very quiet child, especially around adults, and that. But then as I did it, it allowed me to be like, well, all right, Colonel Essex is obviously a well-read man. He's an intelligent man. He's going to have books. What do I do as an adult? I give away copies of books that I love. I'm like, read this, take this. Well, I'll bring it back. Don't worry about it. If you like it, keep it. So I brought that in a much more stately fashion, and so he slowly became like a grandfather figure, one that he could relate to.
Mhm.
But yeah, but that push to go that way, that was Jessica. Because otherwise, I was like, la la, everything's fine. This is the way it should work. And
Yeah.
yeah, because of that push, she helped me create, I think, one of the strongest bonds outside of Ken's bond with his father.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me. The bonds throughout the book are all um, they're all incomplete, right? Like Ken has incomplete bonds with every character. In this instance, he can't be fully connected to Colonel Essex because he's not related, right? He's just a neighbor and he doesn't know him and hasn't known him since he was a child, and isn't a descendant. And his relationship with his father, is incomplete because he doesn't have a mother in the picture and it's not a family, and this boy has to do things and has to tag along for things that in an otherwise like more stable home might be a fun thing for him to do, but in this case he kind of has to do these things, and his dad obviously has a drinking problem, and so he has to care for him in a way that he shouldn't have to care for him at that age. And then with his grandfather, he has this, his dad obviously has a weird incomplete relationship with his grandfather, so that with his father, so then Ken has it with his grandfather. And it's like all of that to say is like you captured the imperfections of people while still capturing the strengths of those connections, kind of like where they are. And there's an incompleteness that you feel, but still a strength that you feel. And I shouldn't say I feel. And as I felt them, it was like this, it was beautiful and it was sad and it was cool, kind of like all at the same time, but not in like an edgy to be edgy way, but just in like a, here are these people, here are the relationships. This kid's just trying to find his way in the world, and man, wouldn't it be nice if he could find some stability?
Yeah. It I had one person who read it. She told me that she just wanted to give Ken a hug
Yeah,
at the end of the book.
yeah,
I was like, yeah, fair enough. Ken's in a little rough shape there.
yeah.
But
But I trust that he will. I trust that he'll find it. I mean, he'll find himself, and he'll kind of recall these experiences and move forward. What year
yeah,
does this take place again? It's a bit of
85.
85. Yeah. Okay. So
You
80,
know,
yeah. So yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Really cool. I mean, I loved it. I could keep just like going on and on about the book. Like I said, it's one that it's not that. Not that DRC doesn't publish things that other civilians should read, right? Because especially because the goal is to bridge the military civilian divide. Um, through literature, but there's something about this one in particular that has grabbed me. There's a few people that I'm going to send it to, um, that I think would get a more full picture of the veteran experience through this fiction than they might, even through, like, first person memoir or poetry. Again, not to disparage any of the other authors or DRC, but there's definitely something about this one that I think you captured the, I don't know if it's the periodness of it. I don't know if it's the young adultness of it. I don't know what it is, but there's something about it that's just different.
Yeah, I think it works because Ken is young and he's not bringing in expectations. He, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Men at Work with Emilio Estevez, Charlie Sheen, right? Yeah. And at one point, when they learn that they're going to have an observer with them, they say they hope it's not some crazed Vietnam vet, and that's exactly what they get. Yep. And I didn't want a character with those stereotypes, just like I didn't want a veteran who was like, yep, I get all this, I understand it all, because I really wanted Ken to be able to hear their stories, as a boy.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because it is fully. It's just devoid of. There's no ideology in this book at all. I think that might be my favorite part of it. There's none whatsoever. It's just a kid listening and observing things from his perspective, and even that incompleteness of his perspective, his immaturity, not in the sense that he's immature for his age, but he doesn't have the maturity of age and of experience and of service and of like all of these things. He's just a little bit more open to just receiving the information, to receive it and put it into different places so that he can then figure it out later. And that's probably me projecting. But yeah, it's interesting.
And we also, we don't have the veterans saying like, everything is great, you should enlist right now. Right. Here's the paperwork, we'll see you in 6 years, kid. But like right from the get-go, Colonel Essex talks about the cost of war and whether or not he believes it's worth it. And I wanted that. I didn't want somebody beating the drum. There's a time for it. There's not a time for it. And I am a big fan of enlisting. And I talk to my kids at school. Like, I think you should do some form of service, whether that's enlistment, whether that's the Peace Corps, whether that's volunteering. You should serve and understand what it is to serve. But I'm not going to tell you that the military is not going to bend you over and introduce you to the big green weenie, because that's exactly what it's going to do.
Yeah. That's another conversation that's starting to unfold in our country right now that is just fascinating to watch at this age. And having enlisted, you see this all. And listen, at least half of them, if not 80% of all these fucking accounts on X and Instagram are Russian and North Korean, bots.
Oh yeah.
But this conversation that's unfolding, like, I wouldn't enlist in this environment, this woke environment, in this environment, blah, 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 the military, blah, blah, blah. Like, listen, bro, the military can have its problems, and it is still a great place to go serve, a great place to go grow, a great place to go learn who you are, what you're capable of. And at the end of the day, like, this country and who we are as a people are separate from our governments and from our militaries. And that is the only country in the history of the earth that has been or ever will be that way. And so I don't want to hear the like, whoa, well, this is happening, so I don't want my kids to serve. It's just like, you know what? Everybody's on their own journey, and service is a good thing.
I talked to one boy. He was a sophomore, so this was 6 or 7 years ago. I talked to him, and he wasn't sure what he was going to do when he got out of high school. I'm like, listen. You like cars, you like vehicles, dude, you can enlist in any branch, become a mechanic. And when you're all done, you can go out with those skills. I talked to his cousin the other day. He enlisted right out of high school. He's still in. He loves it, you know? And that's all it takes is somebody to say, there are jobs where you don't have to shoot things. Like I tell the kids, like every 5,000 combat troops, there's about 15,000 support. So there's a lot of jobs in the military. And if you're going to enlist, talk to me first. I'll tell you whether or not you should be doing that job.
Yeah, no doubt.
You get those. No doubt. It's like, oh yeah, they told me that 11 Bravo is really easy. I'm like, did they now? Well, do you say no thank you? You're going to go over and talk to the Navy recruiter, and they're going to talk to you real quick about other jobs you can do. So, no.
Yeah. Yes, and that's as I think as good a place as any to wrap things up. We'll link out in the show notes website for Dead Reckoning Collective, where to buy the book. I'll tag and collaborate with you across Massachusetts on Instagram. But where can folks find the rest of your writing? Where do you want to drive traffic? Where can folks find you?
Basically on Cross, Massachusetts on Instagram. There's a link tree there. It has a link to, obviously, Killers in Their Youth, and then a whole bunch of my Duncan Blood stuff, the Cross Massachusetts stuff. And yeah, it's pretty much where I'm mostly at,
Amazing. All right. We'll link out there and collaborate on some posts and get this conversation out there. To end each episode, Nick, I ask an open-ended question. What's on your heart and your mind for our community? Could be a piece of advice, something you want to get off your chest, or something you want to reiterate from what we've talked about today. But Nick, what's on your heart? What's on your mind?
That as veterans, we really need to keep talking to each other and keep checking on each other. Because a lot of us are sad and we don't know why, and we can all get into the PTSD and we can say it, but we got to dig into it. Digging into it is hard as fuck. And some days everything just shits. But those are the days you got to remember that your friends are there, And even you can be talking to somebody and they can just literally flip the switch and be done. And you can't blame yourself if that happens. But if you feel like that, you got to reach out to somebody, anybody, even if it's just, calling up somebody you really don't like and just saying, I hate you, just so you hear a human voice. But yeah, that's it.
That's right. Couldn't agree more. Reach out to either one of us for sure. We're here.
Always. Dude,
Lots of resources.
Yep. And the number of people that I've met on Instagram who I've seen them going, dude, my life sucks. Yeah, I've just sent them a message. Talk to me. What's going on?
Yep.
That's all you have to do. But yeah.
Yep. No doubt.
I overstep all the time.
Yeah. Listen, make aggressive mistakes in that direction, because the last thing you want to do on that end of the conversation is be too passive, and then something happens, and that's just be aggressive, default aggressive, as Jocko says, right? Sir, appreciate your time, appreciate your energy, appreciate your words, and your friendship as well. I'm looking forward to putting this out there.
Awesome. Thank you, man.
Cheers, brother.